fortunate enough to attend the first Otakon, but I did go to the second one in 1995 when it was still at Penn State. There were only 450 people there. I live on the West Coast, and at the time I wasn't attending many East Coast cons as I do now. So I didn't return to Otakon again until 7 years later in 2002. In just 7 years, Otakon had grown from 450 people to almost 13,000 people. And even 20 years ago, it was clear that a whole new generation of fans had risen up. So I want to start a little bit about 20 years ago at Otakon. This flyer shows not only some older anime, but also some older anime fan culture. This flyer is inviting people to come to a room showing to watch some anime on behalf of one of the clubs I belong to, Foothill Anime. By room, I don't mean a panel room, I mean a hotel room. You'll notice the hotel room number at the bottom is left blank because, of course, until I checked in, I wouldn't know the exact number. Then I'd write it on the flyers. If you ask why you would need to come to a hotel room to watch some anime, the reason that is in 2002, anime was still mainly something that had to exist on physical media, a VHS tape or a DVD. Digital distribution, whether authorized or not, was coming very soon. But BitTorrent, for example, had only launched the year before, and Crunchyroll didn't launch until 2006. So that was one of the reasons why anime clubs were a bigger part of fan culture at the time. Because anime existed in a physical sense, fans had to exist physically too. In other words, you had to be where the anime was. Of course, many people had their own copies, but it seemed a natural part of being a fan to all get together on a regular basis and watch anime, and network and socialize. If this all sounds like some of the same reasons people go to cons, you wouldn't be surprised to know that many anime cons were started by anime clubs, particularly college anime clubs. This is true of Otakon. Otakon, as I mentioned, began with the Penn State fan community. In the San Francisco Bay Area, I was a member of two school clubs. Cal Anime Alpha at UC Berkeley, who founded a little event that's now known as Anime Expo, and Foothill Anime from Foothill College in Silicon Valley, one of the co-founders of AnimeCon. Anyway, this flyer is for a Foothill Anime sponsored room showing at Otakon 2002. Again, you might ask, why bother to promote a club whose meetings were on the other side of the country? It wasn't we expected fans from Baltimore to suddenly start attending our meetings. It's more like the mixing of all the people that happens at cons, people from around the country and the world. You want to represent your own scene as well, and you also want to find out about other people's local scenes. That was a part of it. Looking at the flyer now, I'm astonished at just how 2002 it was. Not only the choice of anime such as Abenobashi, described as the new series from Gainax. It was new, the series had just finished the previous month. And remember, there were no simulcasts back then. But the Illustrator 10 effects, and especially the reference to the song Get Free by the Vines, which had just been released a few weeks before. For a short time at Foothill Anime, you wondered whether the Vines were the second coming of Nirvana, and Craig Nichols was Kurt Cobain using Kung Fu to fight back from the grave. And of course, our role model at the time, standing up there on the right, was Goo. You'll note the Sonic Youth joke from the anime Hare Goo, based on the manga by Renjiro Kinaichi Sensei, who made a pro debut of this manga when she was only 16 years old. I wonder if Hare Goo would be bigger if it came out today. It might have been a little too unconventional for its time, even for most anime fans. Goo, by the way, had mastered the noodly arm technique 2 decades before Nagatoro. Okay, so 2 years later, I joined Dark Horse, and I hear that's the subject of this panel. So let's get into that.
Yeah, Godzilla kicks ass.
Dark Horse Comics, as I mentioned, was founded in Milwaukee, Oregon, by Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley in 1986. It was just 2 years later we published our first 2 manga titles, which you see right there. Cousin Hisei Wata's manga adaptation of the 1984 Gojira film, and Outlanders by Joji Manabe. This means Dark Horse is the second oldest continuous publisher of manga in English, right after Viz Media. Randy retired only recently, and Mike Richardson is still president of the company. They were both young kids in the 1950s, and that means they were part of the very earliest generation of kids getting into Japanese pop culture. Before manga and even before anime, there was kaiju, giant monster movies, which came to the US beginning in 1956, which is when Godzilla came out. I believe it's been documented that Godzilla actually made more money in the United States than it did in Japan. So when you read about the Eisenhower era in history books, remember that there were kids who were already enjoying Japanese pop culture in the United States. So it wasn't surprising that Godzilla was picked as our very first manga, because it represented what they loved as kids. Outlanders, by the way, was edited by another person who was in Dark Horse very early, Chris Warner. Today is our senior books editor. Chris is also the editor of the late Kentaro Miura's Berserk. So he is, as you may notice, since he was editing manga in 1988, he's been editing manga longer than anyone else in the United States, as far as I'm aware. He also came out with Alien vs. Predator and a lot of other things. so I guess they invented that concept. I point this out to say something about the long-term commitment of Dark Horse to manga, but also the way the commitment intertwines with our comics culture. I'm the only person at Dark Horse who specializes in only Japanese titles. But before I came to Dark Horse and Viz in 2004, Dark Horse started publishing manga for 16 years, including very well-known titles like Oh My Goddess, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, and Wolf and Cub. And these manga were naturally edited by people who also write comic books. That's still true today. Blade of the Immortal is edited by Philip Simon, who also is the editor of our Eisner-winning comic, The Fifth Beatle. Daniel Shaven, who's the editor of Neil Gaiman, that's the book American Gods at Dark Horse. And he's also the recently edited his first manga, Minotauro Mochizuki's adaptation of Wes Anderson's film, Isle of Dogs. I want to talk about one of my senpai in this industry, Torrin Smith. In many of the early manga that you will look at from Dark Horse, you will see the Studio Proteus label there in the lower left. Torrin was one of the true pioneers of manga in this country. He basically sold all of his belongings in 1986 and staked everything on going over to Japan to make contacts in order to get licenses. What Torrin would do is he would license the manga, translate the manga, letter the manga, and basically give something that was ready to publish. So Dark Horse did very many of its manga in partnership with him. So did Eclipse Comics and also Fantagraphics. And again, he was one of the people who really gave my start in this industry, together with people like Trish Ledoux at Viz and Helen McCarthy in England, who was at Anime UK at that time. Torrin Smith, by the way, was a guest of honor at Otakon 1995. So as you probably guessed, this is a mix of Dark Horse's American comic books and the manga that we used to publish in comic book format. If any of you have ever seen a manga from the 80s or 90s in English, you'll know this is the standard format that manga were published in. It wasn't just Dark Horse, every company did this, including Viz. It might be strange to think of publishing manga in comic book format, and what does that mean, by the way? That means instead of publishing it an entire tankobon at once, instead you split up each black and white chapter into, let's say, a 24-page comic book, and you put out one chapter a month in a comic book form. Obviously you have a color cover, but it's a black and white comic inside. The very first manga I began at Viz, I was the editor of Neon Genesis Evangelion, that was Shuki Sadamoto, that's where I started. And for the first 5 years, that too was published in comic book format. It may seem strange again, but there are some very famous manga magazines like Shonen Jump, which are published weekly. But in truth, most manga magazines in Japan come out monthly. So if you get an entire tankobon at once, you're actually not reading it the way the Japanese fans did. Most manga are created to be read one chapter a month. So in that way, doing comic book format was also not so strange. Also, oddly enough, we're now doing the deluxe formats of manga, which are 7 by 10 inches. But that's the size American comics were. In other words, the so-called deluxe format is just what American fans used to take for granted every Wednesday down at their comic shop. The paper quality is higher. But, and the other reason they were publishing comic book format is in the 80s and 90s, there was not really yet a manga readership per se. What there was instead is there was an American comic readership, and a certain percentage of American comic fans supported manga. So it's important to note that manga got started here with the support of the American comics fans. And if you look at some of the very earliest people who worked on adapting the manga and lettering them, you'll find people who are involved in the American comics industry. People from Marvel and DC like Mark Wolfman and Len Wein. Tom Orzechowski, the letterer of the X-Men, he was the person who lettered Appleseed, they showed up on name, because they were the people who had the skills and the talent. And again, the idea was to get manga launched in the American comics market, and therefore bring high quality people from the American comics industry to adapt it. Again, it wasn't so strange because you had people like Frank Miller, who was very big in the 1980s, becoming a superstar with titles like Ronin and Dark Knight Returns, Electro Assassin. And he was very well known and very open about his manga influences, particularly from Lowell and Cub, which we'll talk about a little bit later. How many of you have been to this place? Okay, well, we're all hoping we can go back there again. This is Akihabara, one of the mecca of otaku culture, although everyone knows the real place is Nakano. But to be a hardcore fan of Japan, you can't really be a hardcore fan of getting manga. I mean, everybody reads manga in Japan. No, if you want to be hardcore, you've got to read American comics. And you may be surprised or not surprised that the best American comic shop in Japan is in Akihabara, in Blister Comics. And we'll just zoom in on the upper right there, and you'll see two Dark Horse titles, Archie vs. Predator and Usagi Yojimbo. This is from Blister's ordering site late last December. And these are Dark Horse titles that they're ordering. They order from the Diamond catalog, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I think a very interesting mix of what they're doing. They have Invisible Kingdom, second from the left, written by G. Willow Wilson and drawn by Christian Ward. That won the Comics Industry's top prize, the Eisner Award, in the Best of Series category. So they're paying attention to what's happening in terms of American comics, in terms of what is critically respected in the American comic scene. All the way on the right is a final issue of Masters of the Universe Revelation, proving that there are Masters of the Universe fans in Japan. Dark Horse has a very long history of comics based on movies and TV shows, and you'll notice the Netflix series Stranger Things here, which we've done an extensive line of comics for. And there's even down at the bottom left, Cloaked, which is, I mentioned the president and founder of our company, Mike Richardson. He still writes comics, and that's one of his. Also very interesting, though, are two titles, Empowered by Adam Warren. And Mike Richardson, Adam Warren was one of the best-known people to bring manga style to American comics. Manga style, of course, is a very broad term. He was particularly influenced by Shirow Masamune, as many people were in that era. The Dark Horse did two licensed adaptations in anime, Bubblegum Crisis and Dirty Pair, Run to the Future. And for a while, we were getting a lot of orders of Dirty Pair from Japan, because for a very long time, nobody was making any new official Dirty Pair stuff in Japan. The only official stuff that was being made was the Dark Horse Dirty Pair comic. Empowered, do any of you read that comic? It always depends on cons. It's a different mix of people, and sometimes there's more American comic readers than others. So Empowered is a superhero story. It's a secret identity of Alyssa Megan Powers. She's a member of a team known as the Super Homies. She's the only member of the team who actually studied how to be a hero in college. She got a bachelor's degree in superhuman studies. She wrote her thesis on criticizing the way that superheroes always pick up cars and throw them at people. She points out that since modern vehicles are made with crumple zones for safety, this is the equivalent of putting a rock inside a box of Kleenex and throwing it at someone. She said that if you're superpowered, what you should do is you should rip open the trunk, rip out the engine block, and throw the engine block at someone. The problem is that ever since Superman raised that car always had to cover Action Comics #1, everyone thinks they have to throw a car. So she tries to bring a little bit of intelligence to her team, but they're too wrapped up in themselves. The name like Super Homies, these are not exactly the elite. And so she doesn't get a lot of respect, and another reason she doesn't get a lot of respect is she doesn't have any powers of her own. All of her powers come from her costume. Well, you might say, well, what about Tony Stark? Well, yeah, but she didn't build her costume. Her costume literally fell out of the sky in a package addressed to her. She doesn't even know where it was from. However, her big advantage is that she actually does have a heroic personality, and no matter what, will do the right thing. So the leader of the Super Homies, and I'm showing the influence that Adam Warren has taken, not only from manga, but also from manga fan culture. So Major Havoc, the leader of the Super Homies, he has such a big ego that he writes fanfic about himself. And so Major Havoc is upset to find a bad review of his fanfic on Archive of Our Own. Which he doesn't realize the bad review is written by Empowered. Then he suddenly finds out there are yaoi doujinshi have been made by the Japanese fans. And those doujinshi you see in the bottom right are actually drawn by actual Japanese and Taiwanese doujinshi artists. Actually, one of them was drawn by Tomoko Saito, who is the longtime letterer and retouch artist of our manga, Blade of the Immortal. So, our manga sometimes also get licensed in Japanese, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Randy Stradley came up with the idea of just doing a Gamera comic. I said manga, or comics. Well, it turns out there aren't a lot of Gamera manga in Japan. So Blister Comics, which is not only sells American comics, but they also publish them in English, they said, can we get a license to do Dark Horse's Gamera comic book and sell it in Japanese? And of course, that was a great honor. Some of you may recognize either or both of these two magazines. The one on the left is the best-selling manga magazine in history, Shonen Jump. It is today the only manga magazine which sells more than 1 million copies a week. Stranger Things, that's the cover of Previews, Diamond Previews. This is a catalog from which every comic book store in America orders from every month. And by the way, the catalog still looks like that. It's still this inch-thick print thing. It may seem very strange to have a print catalog in this day and age, but you're buying comic books. I mean, you're buying print things, so why not? Here's our manga and our comics promoted side by side in the previews. So you see Conspiracy of Ravens on the left, a comic book, and Mob Psycho 100 on the right. And again, these are Dark Horse, public manga published by Dark Horse and comics published by Dark Horse. I chose these because the comic beneath each of the manga was inspired by that creator. So you have Zodiac Star Force by Kevin Panetta, Tony the Gunner Cho, and Sarah Stern, which took inspiration from Cardcaptor Sakura. And you have ElfQuest, which took inspiration from Osamu Tezuka. ElfQuest is by Wendy and Richard Pini. Wendy Pini once said the thing that manga taught her that American comics did not is that you can have these really grim, dark, horrible situations and have cute characters. Because in manga, in American comics, it's always been that if you have a really grim, dark, horrible situation, the character's got to be the goddamn Batman. So, your character's got to look badass, got to look mean and all that. Well, manga was kind of liberating for her because there doesn't necessarily have to be, your characters can be cute, you can just have horrible situations you want. And she found that really liberating as an artist. So these are other of our books that have been translated into Japanese. So these are all books originally published by Dark Horse and then were licensed back into the Japanese language. We didn't literally trade one for the other, but we licensed Mob Psycho 100 from Shirokon, and Shirokon, technically Shopro, licensed Sin City from us. It would have been fun if we had directly traded it, but that didn't happen. So here, for example, is the Japanese edition of Hellboy in Mexico. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that the English sound effects are left in, and some of the cries of the zombies. The captions and some of the dialogue are in Japanese, and the dialogue that was originally in Spanish has been left in Spanish. So it's very interesting to see the editorial decisions. So obviously, the people who are translating this are well aware that the story takes place in Mexico, and dialogue that was in Spanish in the English edition was left in Spanish in the Japanese edition. Umbrella Academy is very well known, not only because it won the Eisner Award for Best Limited Series, another one of our series that did that, but because of the Netflix series, season 3. Has that already started yet? It's supposed to be in June. Yeah. There's a long and complex relationship, again, between our Japanese titles and our English titles. You're probably not going to be surprised, again, that Umbrella Academy has been published in Japanese. But there are even doujinshi of Umbrella Academy in Japan. So you probably can't make out that Japanese text at the bottom right, but it's from a doujinshi, and it says, I thought this was another Mignola-esque clone, and I picked it up out of casual interest. Upon further inspection, there seems to be some pretty deep stuff going on. It looks really great. The person who wrote that and the person who made that drawing was the person who created this, which is also published by Dark Horse. And I'm the editor of the Pantheon Stocking manga, which, by the way, is coming back into print. And as you probably all heard, in Mexico, there's going to be a new Pantheon Stocking project. Trigger announced it. I don't really have details yet about what it's going to be. Presumably it's an anime, since they are an anime studio. Some of you who may be comics fans may be familiar with the American concept of the gallery edition, or the artist edition. That's basically where you round up all the original art, assuming that it was drawn on original art, and you publish it in a way so that you see the original art in its form, not the way it gets cleaned up from comics. I have asked many people about this, and I don't like to make any boasts that can be disproved in 5 seconds on Google, but I've asked everyone I know in the American and the Japanese industry, and as far as I know, Dark Horse is the only people ever to do that for a manga. So we did a gallery edition of Wolf and Cub. You can see the size of the book. On the bottom right was our original edition, which was published in 2000, Bunko size. And the upper right there is the Tankobon size, about 5 by 7 inches. Wolf and Cub ran from 1970 to 1976. It was created by 2 creators who are passed away now, writer Kazuo Koike and artist Koseki Kojima. Most of the, so it's 28 volumes, something like 7,500 pages. Most of them have been scattered to the winds. However, they held on to the very last chapter, and this is from 1976, and this came into the office. I took these pictures, and I kind of trembled as I took them. I had never seen manga original art before. usually ideal in digital materials from Japan. And before that, it was in film prints. But this wasn't just any original art. This was the final chapter, one of the most famous manga ever created. And if you look carefully at the pages, you can see that they're worn. You can see the brown tape there. But that's the idea. That's what we're trying to do with Gallery Edition, to get you as close to how the artist actually saw it on their board in their studio as possible. So that's what it looks like inside the Gallery Edition. On the right-hand side is a 2400 DPI scan of the original art. And again, at full size. And again, you can see the markings down there and the tape. And then on the left-hand side is the English edition of it. You'll notice the English edition is flopped. That's because Ghost in the Shell 2 was also flopped. Littleton Cub again came from the days when manga was mainly done for American comics fans. And one of the major aspects of that was flopping it, because Americans generally read. How do Americans read? So used to left to right, right? You always left to right. And again, even Viz, which is a Japanese company, published their manga that way for the first 50 years. So it wasn't done out of ignorance, but out of trying to integrate ourselves in the market. There were double-page spreads as well. And for the first time, we were able to bring out some of the delicate ink wash color. So we were very proud to be able to do this. And again, while this type of edition is common in American comics, no one had ever done it as a manga. So we feel this is one of the things that we as a comic book publisher were able to bring to manga publishing. And now for something completely different. Danganronpa, I haven't seen a lot of Danganronpa costumes here, as I always do. Danganronpa, by the way, is actually one of our most popular manga. I'm the editor of our Danganronpa series, and this gets into one of the other things that influences us as an American comics company. One of the traditions in American comics is you have a letters column in the back. Well, even though we're publishing manga in Tankobon form these days, that's no reason why we can't. That's one reason why we can't have a letter column. And so we get a lot of great response from fans. Fans send in their art, their cosplay photos. And it's also a great way to invite people to be a part of the actual book. So we're happy to be able to do that. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about, I've talked a little bit about Dark Horse's history. Now I'm going to discuss a little bit about what Dark Horse was doing last year and is doing this year as well. Were any of you at Anime NYC last year? Okay, so did any of you have the chance to sign the Kentaro Miura Memorial Wall? I came in the first day. These photos were taken at the end of Friday. It looked like it was already completely filled. No way. Fans spent the next 2 days trying to find any square millimeter they could that was not filled in. They were squatting down the ground. They were standing up on chairs. There were so many people who wanted to sign this wall. Because Miura Sensei passed away during the pandemic, and there wasn't really any chance at the time for people to come together. So we wanted to do something physical. And the thing about that wall is it's arranged so that the part that has the signatures can then be taken off and rolled up. And we sent that back to the publisher in Japan, Tom Sensha, so they can see for themselves all of the sentiments and condolences that were done by the American fans. At this time, of course, we did not know that Berserk was going to continue. And of course, like everyone in Japan, we were hoping for the best for that. It's a real challenge, but I think if anyone can do it, it's probably Miura Studio and its best friend. They're the ones to be trusted on that. This title is almost as brutal as Berserk. Well, no, I'm just kidding. It's not all brutal. You're probably wondering what this title is about. It's not one of those mysterious, lengthy manga titles. It's about a cat and it's about a gamer. So it's about Riko. She is an office lady, and one day she surprises everyone. A security guard finds a cardboard box with a kitten in it in the parking lot. She decides to adopt it and take it home. The problem is that she knows everything about playing games and she knows nothing about cats. So she tries to raise the cat as if she's leveling it up in a game. So the cat is also trying to understand exactly what she's doing as well. By the way, the cat is based on the creator's own cat. So there's a lot of verisimilitude in this. You see we have a real split personality here when it comes to our titles. Berserk, by Kentaro Miura, again, we are continuing with our deluxe edition, and actually, I believe we are giving away a copy of Book 11 at the end of the panel. We're very proud to be able to present such a, I don't want to say epic, apocalypse. It's. I really don't think there's anything that can. I'm not sure there's anything that can compare to it in American comics. Closest I can think of is a Game of Thrones. But in terms of an epic like this done, an American creator, creator owned, it's just hard to find anything like that. And that's the very reason I think it's been so successful. There's no shortage of creativity and talent in American comics. I mean, obviously we're an American comic creator ourselves. But if there's anything out in American comics that can compete with Berserk specifically, then I don't think Berserk would be so successful. Berserk is so successful because it's filling a niche that, for whatever reason, is not being filled. Or it's not being filled so well. A title that many people have requested to come back is coming back. Kurosagi Corpse Delivery Service. As a matter of fact, it will be out August 17th. The book exists. I have an advanced copy in my office, in case you're wondering. So we've already done, we published the first 14 volumes of Kurosagi as individual volumes. The first 12 you see were already collected as omnibuses. By the way, we're reprinting all of our early omnibuses. So basically, we would like people to discover this great series from the beginning. So book 5 is not being sent out there on its own as an orphan. Book 5 will collect volumes 13 and 14, which have already been published in English, plus volume 15, which has never been published in English. So that will be exclusive to the manga. And by the way, we are going to continue Kurosagi on an omnibus-only basis. We are currently working on book 6. So that will contain 16, 17, and 18, which have also not been published before. And hopefully we can go as far as we can with that. Here's some preview pages. There are 3 stories that have never been published before in book 5. The first one, the Kurosagi Corpse Delivery Service, is given a job to you may have heard scandals about people in Japan who hide the fact that elderly relatives have died so they can keep collecting their social security checks. So they're given a social welfare job to check up and see if these old people are really alive. Well, they find one who's 114, and they think she's dead, but as you can see, she's just she's a very alive bad lady. Unfortunately, she has completely lost her identity, her memory, because she has a massive head wound that happened at some point in the past. It turns out, however, that she is not the bad lady she appears. She's connected to a great deal of money, and this is connected to the person who gave her the massive head wound. This is exactly the type of mystery that Kurosagi gets into. The second story brings back so they go to a Buddhist college at their university, but there also is an engineering school, or the School of Robotics. And 3 mad scientist grad students named Tezuka, Nagai, and Tomino, after the Agro franchise. So basically, they have a business model where they're putting electronic implants into dead people, and they think they can compete with Amazon by using corpses to make home deliveries. So basically, as long as people come to your house and deliver your package. I told you they were mad scientists. The third story deals with 2 of the great modern disasters in Japanese life. First of all, Fukushima, which today is still a dead zone, and then the legacy of the 1995 terrorist attacks by Aum Shinrikyo. It turns out in the story that some of the elite killers in Aum Shinrikyo have been hiding all this time, and they're trying to sneak into Fukushima to steal fuel rods, basically so they can sort of commit radioactive terrorism in Tokyo. Their plan is they're going to take one of the fuel rods and they're going to put it inside a water tanker, and they're going to drive the water tanker downtown Tokyo, and they're going to let out the water. So Kurosagi has to stop them. Mob Psycho 100. Now I believe Crunchyroll Expo is where they're going to debut season 3. That's actually next week, I think. October, is it coming out, I believe?
Yep.
Yeah, and I was watching the trailer for season 3, and it looked like there were a number of scenes which are in volume 9 of the manga. So we're kind of synced up with that. Vampire Hunter D is perhaps the longest running light novel series. The illustration styles are different from today's light novels, but that's because tastes in otaku illustrations have changed. The original illustrator was Yoshitaka Amano, who had not even become famous yet for Final Fantasy. That would happen several years later. But Vampire Hunter D started in 1983, and we're still running. Working on volume 30 right now. But we've been collecting the early books into omnibuses, and the first omnibus was so popular that we did a second printing before the first omnibus even hit the stores. And I'm really happy that this classic story from the 1980s is finding a whole new audience. Speaking of Amano Sensei, we are the publisher of a book illustrated by him, Shinjuku. And this is one of the privileges that I have working at Dark Horse. This is not a translation of a Japanese book. This is an original from Dark Horse. In other words, our English edition is first time it's been published. It's a sort of hard-boiled sorcery crime story set in a imaginary version of Shinjuku. It's written by one of the members of Quentin Tarantino's group, The Band Apart, Christopher Morrison. He goes by the name Mank. He's mostly known for his music videos. But he did do a Steven Seagal movie, if I'm not mistaken. And it is illustrated by Yoshitaka Amano. Now it has over 100 illustrations by Amano Sensei. And at first I was thinking, how in God's name would be able to afford to get Amano to do 100 commissioned paintings? Well, it turned out that he originally just was only expecting 20 paintings. But Amano Sensei liked the story so much he did 100. So, when you please the artist like that, you've got something. So yeah, it is an illustrated crime novel about a bounty hunter who comes to Tokyo in search of his missing sister, and then finds out that the local Yakuza are mixed up in black magic and sorcery, because power over this world is not enough for them. They want power over the spirit world as well. So it's full of great illustrations by Amano Sensei. Gantz, which we published in its entirety, we have also been collecting omnibus format. Volume 10 will be coming out on September 28th. Another item that we will be giving away at the end, although it's book 5, we are publishing Blade of the Immortal in the deluxe format. Blade of the Immortal is another one of our manga that dates from the American Comics days. And as a matter of fact, it was our second longest running manga in the American Comics format. I think we started running in 1996. Psycho-Pass, much requested, is returning, both Volume 5 and Volume 6. And also, we are reprinting the first 4 volumes of Psycho-Pass. And again, the idea is that we want to get more people into it. The final volume of Berserk that Miura Sensei was able to complete during his life will be coming out November 2nd, Volume 41. After that, of course, we're sort of heading into a new adventure in many ways. But not only am I hoping for the best, but of course, as successful as Berserk has been in English and as successful as it's been throughout the world, it is even more successful in Japan. So as much as Berserk means to us, it means far more to the Japanese readers. And that's a very heavy thing to live up to. Again, I have confidence if anyone can do it, the team that they've assembled can. I don't mean to be braggadocious, but I think that I was the very first fan of Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken in the United States. And the reason I say that is, like many things that become better known as anime, Eizouken started as a manga. And I read every month the manga that Eizouken started in Monthly Spirits by Shogakukan. So I became a fan of Eizouken as early as chapter 3. And we didn't even know there was going to be an anime at that point. But I just thought it was so distinctive. I mean, how many times do you see a manga character doing that? So I said, we've got to do this manga. So, and we are, and we've done the first 3 volumes already, but the anime only adapts the first 3 volumes. So if you really were hoping for more from Eizouken, please check out the manga, because we are doing at least through volume 6, and that will be like getting a whole other series. One of the things that the manga develops is the relationship between Kawamori and the person who's probably the other sharpest operator at school, Soane Satake, the secretary of the student council. And trying to figure out exactly what the relationship is. Is she Eizouken's rival? Is she protecting them? Is she protecting them, so from what? And, or is the relationship more personal? So, as in Volume 4, Eizouken gets more ambitious than ever. They go beyond a short anime to something more like an OAV, I think about 20 or 30 minutes. And here you see some of the world building and character building. And here you see some of what goes into editing the manga. So at the top are the instructions that I give the letterer. So I have to go through and mark everything with, because there's so much small text. So I have to tell her exactly, this goes here, this goes there, that goes there. And then she creates that beautiful English version at the bottom. It's kind of like cleaning a fish, honestly. So actually, okay, I can't switch slide over here. But Sawande and Kanamori literally become fashion rivals. Because Kanamori is like always trying to do extra stuff for extra money. And Mizuzaki suggests that, since you can't make a photo shoot, Kanamori could do it. So Kanamori actually does some modeling. It turns out that Sawande was doing the same photo shoot. He may have been inspired by the fact that Owara Sensei brought Eizouken into the fashion world. Did this cover design for Shogakukan's magazine Kankan. One of the people, the actress who plays Mizuzaki in the live-action version of Eizouken, which I don't know if you've seen, is Mizuki Yamashita, who herself is a frequent model in Kankan. So the yellow caption on the cover reads Emo Femi style. Emo Femi is not to be confused with Emo Femi. Ken Kami describes the emo face as a face that makes the most of one's personality and individuality. And that certainly describes the Eizouken characters. So they did a bit where they did fake interviews of the Eizouken characters, asking them what they thought of being fashion models. Mizuzaki replied it was fun, because that's what she does anyway. Asakusa replied, I want to go home. And Kanamori replied, so you're paying us by bank transfer, this will be straight cash. Something I missed because it was during the Olympics last year and foreigners not being let into Japan is the Museum of Contemporary Arts had an exhibit where they invited 20 manga artists to give their idea of the future of Tokyo. And one of the people was the creator of Eizouken, Sumito Owara, who it turns out is remarkably good looking for a manga creator. And he made these physical panels in glass. And these were, again, were at the Contemporary Art Museum. I really hope that sometime we can bring these type of exhibits to a convention here. I would love to have some of these manga-oriented, contemporary art exhibits, on display in America or touring in America. So continuing on, December 21st, Mob Psycho 100 Volume 10 is coming out. Gantz Omnibus, Volume 11. And to all the children, congratulations. Shinji Ikari. It's a happy ending. But switching moods quite a bit. Some of you may be familiar with our previous Go Tanabe H.P. Lovecraft adaptations, both of which were nominated for some of Comics Top Awards, H.P. Lovecraft's The Hound and At the Mountains of Madness. So we're very happy to be doing more. Those of you familiar with the story, it takes place in 1927. A young student who's interested in New England genealogy goes to a fictional town called Innismouth in Essex County, Massachusetts, trying to research his ancestry. Never a good idea in a Lovecraft story. He pretty soon finds out why nobody visits Innismouth unless they have to, because the inhabitants have a certain look to them. Most people just assume it's due to some sort of genetic abnormality. Well, that's sort of the case, but the truth is far more horrible than that. I know in a Lovecraft manga, who would have thought? By the way, something we're starting to see now, which I think is cool, is we're seeing more light novels becoming audiobooks. And that is happening with Vampire Hunter D as well. So these are just the first 3, but I believe the first 6 or 7 are available as well. So you've got 17 more minutes left, I think, or a little bit more. Why don't I take a few questions if you have any? I can hear you fine if you want to just raise your hand. Yes, please.
One of the things I was wondering about is how you choose what options become optimistic, and if there are any chances for a deluxe edition.
Lowell from Cabo, sorry, what?
A deluxe edition for that.
One time, a student from Tufts University asked me that same question. I thought it over carefully, and looking at ways that we had done it, I came up with 9 different ways that we come up with manga, including everything from I saw a single image of it on the internet to the manga creator's sister literally came up to us at a convention and said, "Please publish my Big Brother's manga." That sounds like a name of light novel, doesn't it? But those are all things that those are both things that actually happen. So there's all kinds of ways. It would be difficult for us to do a deluxe edition of Golem and Cub because we don't have, our version is based on the Bunko size, and we don't have full-size materials. I would like for us to do it, but we'd have to like dig into some Japanese archives to see if that's possible. The same way that, for example, that like, you know, the ACO 35mm print was finally discovered.
I'm assuming that would be the same for an April game.
Probably, but I'm not sure. I'm actually not the editor of the Koike titles. Over there, please.
Hi. With Bastard recently coming out on Netflix, I was looking into the history of it and discovered that Dark Horse was the main publisher of it stateside, but dropped off for some reason with the latest few chapters that came out.
Excuse me, we were not the publisher of Bastard, and Viz Media was the publisher of Bastard.
No, sorry, it's my fan voice, so I know where that came from. You did say Bastard, right?
Yeah.
Viz was the publisher of Bastard. I was at Viz at the time. So we have never published Bastard.
Oh, okay, my bad.
No, but I would like to see Bastard come back. Again, I was there when we were doing it the first time. It's a lot of fun. But that's an excellent question, but please address it to Viz Media. I don't think they're here, unfortunately, at the con. But no, I do think it should come back. Yes, please. I think we're talking about reprinting it right now. Actually, I'd like to, because a lot of it has just ended up on the collector's market. I would like to see it in a Yes. Yes.
What are the plans for the deluxe editions of Berserk 13 and 14, given that the chapters don't add up to what they have been currently?
For Berserk?
For Berserk, yeah.
Well, we can't really say, of course, because as you know, Berserk is going to be starting again under a new creative team.
Right.
So it's quite, we don't actually know how long Berserk is going to be. So you're right that we'll have to think about that, but we don't know if it's going to be a problem yet. Yes. Oh, I'm like a mother with her children, I love them all. No, but seriously, I have to. It's like, it's part of my job as an editor to, the interesting thing about being a manga editor is, okay, the manga already came out in Japan, right? That means it already had a fan base. That means people already liked it. Part of my job is to discover why people liked it, because I know they did. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist, wouldn't be here. So I just consider myself, and if we licensed it, we must like it to a certain extent too, right? So I've got to be sort of a professional fan, and just sort of, no matter what type of manga it is, or what type of genre it is, to sort of help it flourish, on its own, and sort of on its own terms, and sort of, whatever crazy thing is happening to the characters, to them it's real. You've got to sort of be there in the moment with the characters. They don't know what's happening in the next panel. So, yes, please, real quick. Well, like a lot of people, I was a fan. As you saw earlier, I was talking about a fan club I belonged to 20 years ago. Manga is not my dream job because when I was in high school in the 1980s, nobody was doing it, and so I couldn't even dream about it. It wasn't even something that I could conceive myself doing. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. You see, I'm still dressed like this. All my friends are lawyers. I'm kind of the black sheep of the family. I was in law school, and I started working at Viz. So it's a long story. One way of telling it is before the internet was visual, it was a text-only based thing. There were a lot of news groups and things like that. And one time in 1993, there was a local bar in Houston which is trying to they were having anime nights, and they say, we're going to show Legend of Yorfine. I thought, well, 60 drunk rednecks watching Legend of Yorfine, so let's see it. So I went to it. I wrote up an article about it on the net called Orphean Night with those. And Trish Ledoux, again, one of my senpai was at Viz at the time, asked if I would start writing for An American Magazine. And so when I went out to law school in the San Francisco Bay Area, pretty soon I was spending most of my time at Viz and not enough time in class. And I thought, well, if I go the lawyer route, I'm going to have to be a lawyer because I'll have these student loans to pay off for the rest of my life. Besides, this will pay me to write for them, and I have to pay law school to write for them. So it's like that tilting board trap in Route 15 of Tomb of Wars, and you've got to jump off it before you get to the center. So the hard part, of course, is explaining to my parents, because they knew what a lawyer was, but what the hell is a manga editor? So, and of course, your parents, they want you to have like a good job and so forth. It wasn't until Pokemon took off that there actually, became like the Bible business proposition, and that really changed things. But I didn't have any special training. Nowadays, of course, there are, if I have to look at it, even though I went to law school, I think the thing that actually helped me the most, that I actually learned the most in my daily work, was my high school journalism class. Journalism teaches you not how to use English, how to use it to communicate, how to use it to reach other people, how to meet deadlines, which is very important in the publishing industry. So if there's one recommendation I can make, if you're still in school, journalism is very good for learning English in action and English on a professional basis. But there are many ways to get into the industry. If you look at Dark Horse's website, we have job openings all the time. It doesn't have to be just in my field, editorial. We need designers. We need people with licensing and marketing experience. We need people with sales experience. We need people in accounting. We have an active warehouse operation, and we do a lot of sales. So there's all kinds of opportunities out there. Yes, please. Thank you. Well, in that particular case, it's because Berserk was originally a joint publishing venture between DMT and Dark Horse. However, at some point, Dark Horse acquired the sole English publishing, so that's why the spines didn't count. It's a little bit similar to another manga I did at Viz, Evangelion. Evangelion originally said the spines created by Gainax, then for several volumes it said created by Gainax and Kara, and now it just says created by Kara. And so that just reflected changes that were happening on the licensing level. So it wasn't done for, that was the reason. I understand, of course, the aesthetic, need to have, spines be consistent. Yes, please.
So I have a question about how does Dark Horse interrogate
Generally speaking, as everything, it's a matter of sales. I can't speak, of course, for every manga publisher. They have their own business models, but each manga at Dark Horse is expected to sort of pull its own weight, which I think is a good thing because we're motivated to create success. And some manga sell so steadily that they never go out of print. Others, like for example, it doesn't have to be something that's particularly famous. Planet Heads, for example. Planet Heads is a 2-volume series. There have been 10 printings of volume 1 and 8 printings of volume 2. Now, some of these are small printings, but nevertheless, the interest is steady enough. So if a manga is not selling enough over a certain period of time, it may go out of print. However, as you can see, that's not the end of the story. We then may decide later on, let's try to bring it back, let's give it another chance. If it's been a few years, like maybe we can reach a new audience. So as you can see, it's a bit of a gamble. We're printing early volumes of Kurosami, early volumes of Psychopaths, but that's because we're counting on the fact that we think these were good manga in the first place, and therefore we think it's worth starting over from the beginning and trying to get a whole new audience from it. So everything is possible. It just depends on things like manga length and all sorts of different factors. Obviously, longer manga are difficult to deal with than shorter ones. Yes, please.
Purely out of curiosity, with Dark Horse's story in the past,
Well, sure. As a matter of fact, we have published, when it comes to Korean, we have published several manhwa. We did Bright and Water God, which I think we did about 15 volumes of. Philip Simon was the editor of that, also the editor of Blade of the Immortal. We have had branches in other companies. We had a Japanese branch actually for a while, and did joint publishing with JBC. And we had a branch in the United Kingdom as well. We've also published many European comics in English. Black Sabbath is our top publisher. So we are now publishing comics. West Africa is really coming up quick now in terms of creative talent. We're publishing a number of comics by Nigerian creators. That's the next part of the world to look at. A lot of people do not realize how globalized comic talent is. I would say that over 50% of all the comics, quote-unquote American comics, are actually drawn by people who are not Americans. That's because of the internet, you can collaborate and work with everybody. We are probably far more global than manga is. Nothing wrong with manga, but almost everybody who does manga is Japanese, a small number are Korean, some are Taiwanese, and a few are from other countries as well. But an American comic creator can pretty much be from anywhere. You may know that even some Japanese creators work in the American comics industry. The woman who draws Monster Suit, for example, is Japanese and draws in Japan. You can't do something like Monsters in Japan. It's not because of the content, it's because it's a 20-page color comic. The industry in Japan is simply not set up to give anybody a 20-page color monthly story. Manga are essentially a black and white medium. That's actually one of the things that interests me about all the influence that people have from manga. So many younger artists are influenced by manga, but they're not drawing in black and white, which kind of interests me. And I asked somebody that said, they said, well, it's because we want to get into American comics, and our comics aren't color. So I kind of understand that. But it is interesting there has not been a revival of like black and white comics in America, which used to be a thing in America all through the 80s and 90s. Let's see, so did anyone not get a raffle ticket? Okay, I want to make sure that everyone gets one before we